Your instrument rating allows you to fly into thousands of airports, even if the weather is below VFR minimums. This rating shows that you're able to control the airplane solely by reference to instruments. However, actual IFR flight is very different from the controlled training environment of flying under the hood with your instructor by your side. Since the demands of instrument flight impose heavy pilot workloads, especially in high-density terminal areas, you need to gather all available information when planning for and making an instrument flight. As with any flight, your first priority is to thoroughly evaluate yourself. There are several key questions you should ask. For example, do you meet the recent IFR experience requirements of FAR 61.57? How do you feel about your ability to fly the types of approaches available at your destination and alternate? For instance, has it been a while since you've flown an NDB approach? How is your emotional and physical health? If you're distracted by a stressful problem, you might not be able to handle the demands of IFR flight. Don't try to kid yourself into thinking that there's nothing wrong. Next, evaluate your airplane. Just because you're instrument rated and current doesn't mean your airplane is capable of making the trip. For example, if the approach at your destination requires DME, does your airplane have DME equipment? And is it operational? Does it have dual VORs to decrease your workload? And have they been checked within the last 30 days? What about the other aircraft systems? Have they had the proper inspections? How does your airplane's performance capability compare with the altitude demands of your proposed route? Many areas have MEAs that can exceed your airplane's altitude capabilities. Also, consider the aircraft's ability to deal with structural icing. Is it certified for flight into known icing conditions? Once you've determined that you and your airplane are ready for flight, turn your attention to the environment. This includes the current and forecast weather along your entire route, as well as potential alternates. Include the ATC system as part of this analysis. Will you be flying in a radar or non-radar environment? What is the most likely sequence of facilities you will contact? All of these elements come together to form the situation. There is a direct relationship between your awareness of the situation and safety. With that in mind, let's look more closely at some of the factors which may influence your decision to make the flight. Obviously, one of your biggest concerns is the weather. Many times it affects your final route selection or your decision whether or not to make the trip. The key to obtaining a good weather briefing goes far beyond gathering basic weather data. You must be able to interpret and understand the information. If you're not sure of what the specialist is telling you or what the reports, forecasts, and charts indicate, then ask for clarification. Remember that although the specialist provides you with an abundance of weather information, the final decision to make the flight is entirely up to you. A primary concern is the predicted weather for the destination airport at your time of arrival. You have several factors to consider here. How does the expected weather compare to the published landing minimums? How does it compare with your level of proficiency? The answer to this question may be affected by your level of IFR experience, your familiarity with the airplane, and your IFR currency. Based on this analysis of your proficiency level, you might want to set your personal landing minimums higher than those published. Now let's look at some of the pre-flight considerations. In addition to the nav log, consider highlighting the en route chart, including all nav aids and fixes. In this way, you can quickly orient yourself on the chart. As to what information you should include on your nav logs, or what information you should highlight on the charts, just remember that as long as you can find what you're looking for, too much information is better than not enough. Planning the approach at your destination is also an important consideration. Study each chart carefully and mentally fly the approach. This includes the arrival routes needed to transition from the en route phase to the approach, the frequencies, and the initial approach fixes. Look at the headings, altitudes, distance information, and the missed approach procedure to see if there is anything out of the ordinary and to get an idea of what to expect. Then move to landing minimums and check the DH and MDA. Also look for any information that indicates additional equipment or special procedures, as well as timing information if appropriate. In addition, review the runway layout and runway and approach light systems. When you examine your charts, be sure to include any possible alternates. Don't wait until you're en route to your alternate before you look at those approaches for the first time. Situational awareness does not stop with just flight planning. It also includes such things as cockpit management. After you've completed your pre-flight inspection, take a few minutes to organize the flight material before starting the engine. This helps you locate information quickly once you're en route. Along with arranging everything in a logical order, have every item close by which you might possibly use during the flight.
Warrior 81312, cleared to the Hutchinson Municipal Airport as filed. Maintain 7000, maintain runway heading for radar vectors. Departure control 120.9er, squawk 4127.
When you obtain an IFR clearance, take a moment to study it and to envision what the clearance is authorizing you to do, especially if any part has changed from your filed route. If you have any doubt about the clearance, read it back or ask for a clarification. During your pre-takeoff check, be especially aware of the flight instruments. Are the gyros up to speed? Is there sufficient vacuum? Is the attitude indicator aligned with the horizon? Then, before departure, you might want to set one navigation receiver to the approach facility in use at the departure airport and the other to your first en route facility. In this case, if you have to return quickly to the airport for any reason, you'll be set for the approach. An important element of the decision-making process is recognizing that a change has occurred and then determining the proper course of action. For this reason, keep track of your position and frequently include the aircraft's engine, electrical, and other systems instruments in your normal scan. For instance, by checking the vacuum indication, you'll notice if an abnormal reading occurs. This can help with the early identification of malfunctioning attitude and heading indicators. Since part of IFR cockpit management includes finding ways to make your job easier, many instrument pilots use a headset to facilitate communications with ATC.
Warrior 312, turning left to 060.
Not only does the headset reduce the time required to initiate a communication, but it lets you talk to controllers without diverting your attention from the instruments.
Warrior 312, contact Kansas City Center on 125.2.
Warrior 312, Kansas City Center on 125.2.
You might also choose to use a lap or knee board to copy ATC clearances, updated weather, and to help keep your flight material organized. If you have one, an autopilot can significantly reduce your workload. With the system engaged, you can relax somewhat from the demands of flying the airplane. This allows you more time to review your route or the approach chart. However, when using an autopilot, make sure you monitor its performance. It is possible for an autopilot to fail or become unreliable. Probably the most challenging and stressful element of a single-pilot instrument flight is the approach and landing. Flying into a terminal area can be fast-paced. Besides controlling the airplane, you must obtain ATIS, communicate, fly the procedure, identify nav aids, intercept radials, prepare the airplane for landing, identify the runway environment, and perform a landing. This is where your organizational skills come into play. By being able to anticipate what is coming next, you'll be able to reduce the stress during this phase of the flight. This is one of the reasons you visualize the flight before actually performing it. As you near the missed approach point in instrument conditions, you must make a decision to continue with the approach or perform a missed approach. During your training, you're taught to immediately execute a missed approach when you reach the missed approach point and cannot identify the runway environment. Sounds simple, doesn't it? However, during an approach in actual IFR conditions, the natural tendency is to want to land the airplane, especially if you can see the ground, but not necessarily the runway. What if you can see approach lights, but their alignment is off? What if you think you see the runway? Or you think the visibility is above minimums? This is when your IFR decision-making skills pay off. Since vague visual cues can cause confusion and disorientation, you must not continue an approach beyond this point unless you know you can meet all the requirements to continue visually to a landing. Many accidents have occurred because pilots have made the wrong decision by continuing the approach without being able to positively identify the runway or to maneuver the aircraft safely to it. It's not worth the risk. To increase the margin of safety, many commercial operations require a crew in the cockpit. When this is done, guidelines or standard operating procedures are established. The crews are taught these specific procedures and are trained to interact as a team in order to obtain the highest level of safety. Likewise, although regulations do not require it, you might want to have another person along during instrument conditions to help with the flight. Even if this person is not a pilot, there are numerous things the passenger can do to assist with the trip. One of these is helping you keep the cabin organized. If your passenger happens to be a pilot, your workload can be distributed significantly. For instance, you can have the other pilot handle the radios and identify nav aids, as well as help you monitor your current position and altitude. However, another pilot can either make your job easier or can cause confusion if your roles are not clearly defined. The delegation of authority and responsibility must be explicitly worked out prior to the flight, or there is an increased chance of a mistake occurring. In other words, you must know who is going to do what. For example, who will be responsible for communicating with ATC? Who will copy the clearances? And who will adjust the altimeter when you obtain a new setting? As you can see, there is great potential for confusion that could lead to a drastic error, no matter how much experience you both have. So take the time to determine each person's responsibilities and communicate with one another to avoid overlooking an essential procedure. Just remember, as pilot in command of the flight, you are the one responsible for the airplane's operation. As you've already learned, flying is a combination of events which requires you to make a continuous stream of decisions. During an IFR flight, you'll experience a whole new set of decisions affecting you, your airplane, and the environment. By practicing the decision-making skills and doing those things which will lessen your workload while flying, you will enhance the safety of your flight.